All right, we're live. So me and Jay Willie with another one of our streams. This one's kind of a magic surprise stream. Happy pre-Thanksgiving week to everyone, or whatever holiday we're on elsewhere. Happy upcoming Black Friday. I guess that's more exciting. Jay Willie, how are you doing today?
No, I'm doing quite all right. And very good is that I have kind of like a break, which is like between high school and college, uh, because I finished the last high school subject that I hopefully need to take ever.
We call them
This
gap years sometimes.
Yeah, I finished it like this semester, and next semester I'm starting college in like January, February time, around that time. So now I'm on a break, so I'm just going to like relax until that happens.
Wait, so you're really just starting like undergraduate now?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I guess you seem older.
Well, I am a little bit
You'll
older than
probably be
most people.
bored.
Pardon?
I don't know. You'll probably be bored if your undergraduate is anything like mine. I feel like undergraduate is now like what high school should be.
Yeah, but I love high school.
Oh, there you go.
But also, like, to be honest, you study philosophy. I'm going to study
Yeah, I
linguistics.
chose really easy.
Right.
I guess,
Like, to me, I think
I guess
philosophy is hard.
people say they're hard. It's hard for some people, I guess.
It's hard for
But for the
me.
kind of person who would choose to major in it, it's easy.
Like, to me, majoring in physics would be easier because then it's more concrete and it's philosophy.
Yeah, one of the funniest things was trying to be a TA in logic. Because if they don't get it, there's like nothing you can do. Like kind of like once you get to like the quantum level where you're like, see, it's a syllogism, and they're like, but why is that true? You're just like it
You're like, because
because it can't
axiomatically.
not be. What do you mean? Like you like plug in examples like see, and they're just like, but it was like that Patrick meme. Like and like I had a friend in college and he was an avowed like socialist and everything, and he struggled with logic, and like I was trying to like tutor him in it, and I was like, see, and he's like, but why and how does that work? And it's like it just wasn't intuitive to him, and it was a
But
thing that
people that
even the
have,
logic professors say is they're like there's like one of what the thing he said in the first day is he was like, well, I used to grade your attendance, but I noticed that there's not really a correlation between people like showing up and what your grade is. Like people who get A's, and people who don't, regardless of if they're good or not. I just have enough examples of all of them that it doesn't correlate. So I just made it all about the test and your homework. And he's like, but then I noticed like it didn't matter how much homework you did either for the same reason. So it's just your test. So you can literally just not show up except for the day of the test and not do any of the homework. And if you get an A on that test, that's your grade. And that's all it's based on. Um,
I mean, like,
so
in some like education system is basically like we're gonna talk about how bad it is, and how it hates you specifically. Um, but like it really like there's like so many things you can go over which is so fucking wrong. Like people just think that like yeah, but you should just go in there and do your best and work hard. It's like you have to do that, but that's not really going to like give you a high grade automatically.
yeah, I guess nowadays with college, depending on what you're in, you have to like do the assignment, but then you have to do your second over of like tailoring it to the environment. um, Being calculated, depending on how much of that game you really want to play. But yeah, I think I also kind of dodged a lot of that with my choices of studies, but inevitably you do have to take something that's like super woke and does force like a progressive worldview and does teach it just as fact, because there's something about them, they just don't have the nuance to appreciate that there could be a point of departure in their worldview. I mean, I have views that you could say the same thing about, but the difference is I'm right.
Yeah, like I think it's easier because I'm going to college in South Africa, so it's not like America.
Yeah, oh yeah, I guess that would
Like
be.
America is the wokest place
You could
ever
maybe
in the
do
world.
a blogging like journal about it. People are
Like
curious
maybe it's
about what
Canada.
education's like over there.
What do you say?
You could do like a blog about what the education's like over there.
Yeah, like education is like it's kind of like I mean, I guess at least he's not American.
I kind of wonder if I have good college stories like that, but I feel like I kind of don't.
But like to me, like education in South Africa and in the EU is like I don't like EU education system very much. It's like really elitist, like Asia.
Yeah. Well,
Like it's different. I think Scandinavia is a little bit like more like based on learning. No, it's results based, basically based on performance. But it is less. It is less based on like um on conformity, if that makes sense. Because at least then you actually require you to be nuanced and critique every source.
well, and a lot of that though isn't even so much. It's conformity, but it's like it's getting the right label degree from the right authority, and it's very much about like drawing that line. Like I remember in Hong Kong, you know, talking about their 4-year-old not being able to get into the quote unquote top kindergarten. You know, like
Wow. Okay, that's Asia. So like, it's a bit different
but
because
it's silly because it's like it's like a lot of them really could care less what's actually happening in the education or like what their kids actually learning. It's just are they learning it at the place that's going to be socially recognized.
well,
Um,
it's a bit different. Like within Scandinavia, it's basically like, do they get the same letter grade? Do they get a high letter grade? That's basically all that matters. Um, and it's like very elitist, but also not because if a student doesn't perform or like doesn't do very well, but if they pass, then they think it's fine. So if you have a lot of potential, but you have other problems, and you pass, which are very low like grade, but you pass, then they think you're good, but you're not going to be able to do anything with that grade because it's low. So they are not like
yeah, and it's really crazy how little your grades matter once you're an adult. Is another
yeah,
thing.
but they do matter when you get into college.
You know, they matter on admittance, but not so much after that.
Yes, but that's like the barrier you need to
That's kind of
cross.
interesting too about school. Like when you switch schools, you get like cool. I could have like a perfect 4.0. I don't want to power shit at all. I think I had one semester where I had like the perfect 4.0, and then like the moment I lost my first point, I was like, ah, fuck it.
Yep. No, that's true. But like when I do think that education system in South Africa is actually pretty bad, but it's not as but it's like it's bad. It's not that as unattainable because like if you take Scandinavia, it's so elitist, so therefore like it's so hard to get a good grade, um, which makes it like very shitty, and it doesn't help you get a high grade; it just help you pass, right?
Yeah, now you're making me even wanting to go back to school just because it'd be fun to do it now. I feel like I'd crush it.
Oh fuck yeah! And
Just pick
that
something
one.
cheap just for fun.
This is like why South Africa and America is bad in a different way because they use like lower the standard
Dude, that's
of
the thing too, is American education is so expensive that I wish it were more normalized for Americans to just fuck off and get their education anywhere else.
It's actually kind of strange that you don't because like in other countries, because other countries are so much smaller, we do all the time.
Hey, we have
Like
comments. We have comments that GPA doesn't even go on a resume. And yeah, and about how I don't recognize Laszlo Povar's name. I'm really ignorant, but homeschooling, yes. I think there's
oh,
basically zero indication that homeschooling is bad at all. And then, you know, the only excuse people have is but socialization. And it's like, you know, the opportunity cost is like whatever you were doing in homeschooling, which is probably, you know, more of like being out in the community and like actually doing stuff and like even like upholding a house, right? You know, you could be doing like gardening, cooking, measuring stuff, buying things, right? There's a lot of like really basic skills, right?
but
Like
it's
it's
not
really just self-evident that school is just redundant and it's just like a gross like form of trauma bonding I think that people have, or like they watch a lot of movies about high school and they think it's
it's
really
fun.
important to capture and be related to shit that happens in stupid movies about high school.
Yeah, but it does like for me. I actually really enjoyed school like all the time.
I mean, yeah, no, I think that the point is though, it's not school versus nothing. There's an entire alternate reality full of experiences that you didn't get to experience, that you would have experienced had you not been in school. And that alternate version of you probably would not be saying, man, I'd really definitely trade all that for sitting in a fucking desk all day. Like,
But that's so fun, though. I think
that's
for
my
me,
guess, at least. I guess technically I have no right to say that. I could be totally wrong, but that's what I believe, and it all culminates into my argument that we need 4-year-old Walmart greeters.
yeah, no, but basically, like what we have going on here is basically like, how do I say? It's basically.
Johnny, nobody knows though. Is I haven't seen you around unless you've changed your name, but yeah, we're about on the same page here. Except
It's
I
like
didn't build a house.
the
I think
education.
maybe see. Some of us have aspirations to build tiny homes. I think there should be like a reality TV show where people try to build tiny homes but like fail.
It will
You
be
know,
someday. It's like,
I could be on that show. I'd be a great episode.
shouldn't we go over how bad education system is more? Like, oh no,
Right.
I
We
want to
do
say
have a
this.
topic for the stream, so we've kind of half segued into it. But the idea is to approach men's issues in a way that yes, it's a men's issue, but it probably also affects particular subsets of men. Sometimes for better or for worse. So
But
we're
before we
looking
go
at
into
that
that,
in regards to issues surrounding education.
yes, we are gonna go into that. But before we go into that, we need to go over we need to talk about how terrible the education system is, because I know that America did the same as South Africa did. Because like, in order to like make sure that more people passed education, then they basically lowered the standard of passing much lower than it was before.
Yeah, I mean, it varies by district quite a lot. So, and that's the thing too, is if you're relying on America's public school system, like where you end up living ends up basically like determining what your choice is. And then it could be one where just because like they're literally not able to keep the students as super seniors for like 2 and 3 years. They don't have like the infrastructure for it. I don't know. To me, it seems like as an alternative, you shouldn't lower the standard. You should make them like do it and then just like move them into virtual or independent learning.
Yeah,
But
like always
yeah,
like special education.
right. Well, I remember I had friends. They called them grad standards. It was like a thing where you had so many grad standards, and it was like a checklist of things that had to make sure that they'd finished by the end. But I don't know. I went to private school, and like I went to public. I went to a combination of different schools because I switched because I would complain, and then my parents would let me switch. Like one time they let me switch to a different Christian school because I didn't like being around Catholics. um,
Like I actually went
but
to
I can tell
plenty.
you that the educational standards, yeah, I think it's fair to assume, like in general, in the public school, they're lower, except for the fact that if you do achieve more, you have more access to like better programs, so you can actually make it like a higher standard. So, um, but I think it's when people are kind of like at like a baseline level where it's like, okay, what are the grad standards? And then a lot of them try to like graduate early, which makes a lot of sense because the first year of undergraduate is kind of like just a way to calibrate all these kids coming from all these different high schoolers. So like usually they like force everyone to take a basic writing class and shit, which is like really stupid. So there's
But
kind of this bleed over overlap between undergraduate and high school that to me it's like where a lot of the education system really comes apart at the seams.
yeah, because like when it comes to students from different countries, especially like, and they
That's
only like,
part of it too. And
but they're like
it's
being admitted on like the same score, right? You take the grades that they have, right? And one country's grades for an A might equate another country's grades for a C. So if two people have performed to the same level, and one get a C and one get an A, the A is going to get in rather than the C because they have higher grade. And the only reason why the other one had a higher grade is because they went to a different education system, not because they were actually performing better.
Oh, well, that's silly then. That has more to do with just how they translate different grade systems into each other. But I think
Yeah.
that's pretty well universalized. Like, to me, I'd be shocked if there's not like a workaround.
Now, some countries have much harder to get a high grade. Like, for example, if you get like a C in Sweden, you get an A in America, for example.
Yeah, because in most, well, because what happens is like there's a demoralizing effect to a bad grade, and teachers try to strike that balance. So then you have some teachers that are kinder graders than others, right? But then also it seems like that's more permissible for certain subjects in school, right? Like you don't find a lot of math teachers who are kind graders, really,
Oh,
because
we had a kind grade in
their
my.
hand is kind of forced. I forced their hand in
We
terms
actually
of
had a
getting
very
a bad grade.
we actually had a really good math teacher when I went to high school because she could see that we in the class that we had, we were like performing very badly, right? So she basically like gave us twice as many tests so that we had more opportunities to prove that we had learned something. So that she had more material to grade so that we could get so that more of us could pass and get better grades.
Right, she has to increase the denominator of tests there.
Right, because like you basically have
Well,
certain
that's
criteria.
also that's brilliant too, because then you're tricking students into thinking that taking a test is a reward.
I mean, it kind of was though, because we're like, finally, can we get another? We got two more. Like,
Yeah, no, that's yeah, that's really smart. I feel like every middle schooler, every high school teacher, we need
yeah,
to
like she was great. I'm so sad that she
if you're
wasn't.
running a kind of the kind of the kind of lesson plan that involves like testing the students. Yeah, that's a smart play.
The reason why she did that was because most of us we basically like didn't get perform very poorly because like um we weren't good at math. Like I remember like the first year of high school, right? In that high school at least, like what we did is that we had to go to class in the math class, and the teacher had to take note that we arrived in class, right? And then when we did all our work in class, we could either go outside and do our work or sit in the classroom and do our work. And many people went outside, and then they didn't do much work, right? Because it was, because it was our responsibility as students to do our work, right? Because if you don't do it, then you're gonna get worse grades. But if you do it, you're gonna get better grades. But it's not. Then he wasn't forcing us, right? So many students just went out and you just talk, you just hang out with friends. You just like, or you studied like independently. Um, but some were in the classroom, right? But then the next year in the second grade of high school, right? Uh, the teacher, right? The other teacher that we got, which was the one I mentioned beforehand, right? She basically said, "No, you're not allowed to leave my classroom." And the reason why was because we weren't performing good enough in the test, so she just couldn't let us do it because we need to have all the classes to get better at math, right? So therefore, she basically like doubled the amount of tests that we could have. We basically had a test and like an extra test, and we had like a lot of criteria that we need to prove that we have learned certain forms of mathematics, right? So therefore, she tested us rather than test all at once. She tested it like all at once and also a lot of it beforehand, so that we had more time to perform a test and more chances to get good grades at the same test in order to have more chances to pass the class and to get better grades.
Yeah, I kind of like the philosophy of just giving students an opportunity to grind their way out of a bad
Yeah.
grade.
No, no,
Like
that
so
was
the
great. Like that's why
problem,
we passed.
that's the
We
thing
passed
though.
because
So
of
when you
that.
look at like a really problematic school situation, the issue is like the kids literally don't show up. They're violent, they're screaming, they just do whatever they want in the class, right? And like the teachers have absolutely no control. And you have like all of these like woke teachers who are fresh out of undergraduate college and they think that they're gonna like show up and it's gonna be fucking freedom riders. And there really should be a dark comedy about that. I think that would be really funny.
I actually like have a dark
Um,
comedy story that I'm
but
gonna
yeah,
write.
it's like they don't even have the opportunity to use these teaching techniques or these like, schemes or these ideas because like the students won't even allow for that opportunity because the
I mean,
environment's
like
just that toxic. And
they
then
wanted a good
it's
school.
obviously the parents' fault, right? but they're not going to take responsibility for it. And part of it is that like we've kind of just ceded a lot of the responsibilities of parents onto teachers because otherwise you don't have enough daycare to have everybody working all the time.
I mean, like, yeah, but like at least we got a good math teacher, and like as long as you give the teacher free hands to try and to do the thing that she did, then it's gonna be good because like the teachers were allowed to say you can't leave the class when we had that subject, or they could say that, oh, you can leave the class a class if you want to, right? And she like weren't allowing us doing it because we weren't performing well enough. And the other teacher, he were allowing us to do that the year beforehand, but she didn't because we weren't performing well enough. And if you don't perform well enough on the test, then you don't get to like then attending the class wasn't an
I mean,
option.
honestly, in my experience, for a teacher to just like make attendance optional is pretty unusual. Like in America, you wouldn't really see that outside of a college
No.
environment.
Taking attendance is not optional. You need to go and take attendance, right? And then it is like a class hour, a class half an hour, class 40 minutes, right? And then if you want to sit in the classroom all that time, that's
Yeah,
up
I
to you.
mean that's unusual. Like most,
Yeah.
just about every
Yeah, but I'm not.
this be
It
there.
is, it is not unusual because I went to school in France, in Sweden, and South Africa. It's not unusual.
Yeah, I guess for America it would be.
Oh yeah, it is. America is very weird. Like the American education system is very bad, but it's very exploitable. Like if you are like me, for example, then I would just breeze through it because it's just so easy, dude. You have multiple choice answers. It's basically like,
Well, it
bro,
all
how
depends on
can
the
people fail
teacher.
this?
I think there's a lot of variance. But like I think that it's really missing the point though to talk about like the school like as it is, because like I think that the big issue is that they always say that the purpose of education is to prepare you for the workforce, right? Because then the other paradigm is the purpose of education is to like expand your horizons. And basically, I think the better the economy is doing, the more they'll say it's the latter, right? And then the harsher times where people say, oh, well, the purpose of education is to prepare a workforce because we have to get shit done,
Oh,
right?
basically, education is use utility in order to like make sure that people like have more options in life.
Right. So here's the thing, though. If you go into any working environment, what's the first thing you do when you have a new employee?
Tell them what to do.
Well, you train them,
Yeah.
right? You have a whole program set up because you're not just going to trust it, like regardless of what their experience says. So a huge amount of education, and especially the most useful education, is being done by employers already. So why not just get rid of this segregation between education and work, and then just normalize people being a part of the workforce?
It's not
Because then
honestly
people
really
can
because
be productive, they can be earning money while they're learning instead of paying money to learn. And then this
it's
all
that
this
whole
infrastructure we built for school environments, they can be reserved for like things where it actually makes sense to have that kind of environment. It doesn't make sense for kids to be in that environment, really. And then what would also happen in turn, what would need to happen really, is for like the public space just in general to become more kid friendly across the board, right?
yeah.
And I think
But
that just allowing kids more into public space, I think it would have a really good effect. I think it would have like a really good community effect, a really good like pacifying effect, right? Like people are less freaked out. I don't know. Like maybe that I know some people would like say totally the opposite on that. It would make things more tense, everyone would freak out or whatever. Um, but like if you look at most workplace standards as far as like safety, when you look at all those standards, it's like this is totally safe enough for like a child to be around here. For the
yeah,
most
that is
part,
true.
right? Like any obvious example you can think of, it's like obviously people wouldn't push that limit because it wouldn't make any sense. Like, well, what about children in like logging and fishing in the coal mines? Well, it's like, well, there's not really a particular reason to put them in that scenario. They wouldn't be
Yeah.
particularly good at the work, right? Like, so
But like I basically think that there's a lot of things that is very good to learn stuff. Like I really like to like learn a lot of stuff, and it is a lot of things that you do learn in classrooms. But usually when you go to school, you go on a lot of field trips. But like the problem I see, especially in the United States, is you basically have like, this is the area where you can do this, and this is the area where you can do that. Everything is so like partitioned, which is so unnatural and stupid. It's not like that anywhere else in the world outside of
Or
North
they give
America.
you like a worksheet activity so that it totally detracts from it. You have to like pay attention to trying to like scavenger hunt for real specific bullshit.
Absolutely, that's what I'm used to.
Walking around on like a hike with like a one of those fucking church pencils, like trying to write.
Like what I know is what you basically hate with school is when the kids, when you're forced to like go out in nature and prepare food using like a bunch of like objects. It was super fucking boring and I hated it. Everybody did, by the way. So I'm like, why if there is like something that the school system does, right, and that they're required to do, that literally every kids hate, why do we have to do that?
I don't
It
know. I
doesn't
mean, I
make
think
any
it
sense.
makes more sense to learn through activities like that. But
Right, but if the activities are boring and uninteresting to everybody involved, then like it's kind of
like one thing that I hate is that like a lot of that is basically subsumed by church, which means that in order to participate in it, like you're gonna be proselytized at, right? And
that's why
like
it's good that the
so
schools
many
do it.
people like they just generically donate, and it's like Christians build all this infrastructure for that. You know, you can look at the YMCA is kind of a great example of it, right? Um, and it's
But this
like,
is
uh,
But this is why it's good that the schools do stuff like that so that people don't have to rely on like churches or rely on like, that their family are like well off. So I like the idea of the schools being able to do this, um, to do a lot of things that is very like engaging for people when they're growing up.
right. I
Um,
mean, it's just if the like the current system to fund it in its current way through a public structure, you know, is retarded just in
yes,
terms of
well,
like bang for
that's
your
the
buck,
given.
right? So like insofar as you like the school system as is in the status quo and really just want that but stable and better and more consistent, you know,
Yes, that is
just a
correct.
model that you know, in America, the way the conservatives always frame it is like a voucher system, right? Where they say, hey, instead of sending your kids to public school, if you haven't done that, you can get a tax write-off voucher, right? Or you get a voucher and then you can use the money toward a tuition, right? Which I mean, I hate counters to progressive bullshit that are like also little schemes like that, right?
It's just like not good. It's just
It
better.
should
But
just
everything is
be
better.
you cancel the whole system and you stop taking people's money, and that's the end of it. You know, not, oh, well, if you meet these conditions, you can jump through this hoop and then take this money for this. It's like, fuck you.
But like
Like,
one of the
no.
most horrendous
Like,
one of the most horrendous systems we have in education is in America at least. It's like no child left behind policy, which is like the most retarded bullshit ever.
well, and then I don't know how often has it played out where the kid with the worst grades and the worst marks just gets kicked out of the school, and that's how they raise the average. Because when Family Guy made fun of that, you know,
Wait,
so it
is
was,
that
I
how
mean, I
it
know
was?
it was parodied in Family Guy, but but like the logic checks out, right? You know, it's like Chris is the has the worst grades in all of school, and under No Child Left Behind, they say, okay, we've decided we're just gonna cancel the expel the kid with the worst grades, so Chris gets expelled from school
But this is
because
like
then it raises the average. So
this
so
is like
the
what I also hate about
so they
America.
literally leave a specific child behind to raise the average, and I wonder like, could you? I mean, you can't just expel a kid for no reason. But if a kid's getting expelled, their grades are probably dog shit. Also, you know.
You just like make it so that you can expel for so many reasons, so that all the bad students get expelled all the time. Like that's what it incentivizes. That's basically like it just becomes terrible because if you go to UK, many schools are literally prisons. They literally like say you can walk they literally have like lines of where you're allowed to walk during a day. You're allowed to walk from this classroom and then to this classroom, then to this lunch break, then to this classroom and this classroom, right? They call it the one-way system, where you're then only walking one direction, then you're done with school, which is like so fucking retarded. But Britain is a communist shithole. It's like it's basically the worst country in the English-speaking world.
Why are they
That
the
would be,
worst?
yeah, it is.
You mean just like the worst quality, or
No, the worst period. Like it's worse than South Africa, Canada, and like Ireland, Australia, and America, which is quite a low bar.
well, and that's the thing too, is like I think whenever you try to compare educational standards across time, it never looks good.
But there's something
So it's
also
kind of
with
like
you.
if we've already accepted that as the standard, like why even bother, right? If like continuing with school and education allows things to slip so much and we don't care.
Yeah, but there's one thing a huge problem I have with this education that they're doing. They're not just doing it like in America, they do it in South Africa, likely France too, and Sweden too, basically every country, I guess Germany, Switzerland, what you have you. And that is that they basically always focus on making sure that the worst student passes. They aren't trying to focusing on the passing students reaching up their potential. Which means that if you have a lot of really intelligent students that are very like have a lot of of prospects and they're very driven, their intelligence. They might not be driven; they might just be very smart, right? And they could like do very well. They can do very good, right? Uh, so basically, like instead of focusing on helping the kids that are passing to reach their full potential, right? The kids that can actually go somewhere and do something with their life. They're always focusing on the underperforming kids so that they can pass. And the only thing that matters is if the least performing kids passes, rather than the intelligent kids or gifted kids or talented kids get the credentials that they need to get to where they can go. Because like rather than to like look at your student body or the generation you're having in a school setting and see that some kids have a lot of potential, right? They're ignoring that because as long as they're passing, it's not a problem. But just because you're passing doesn't mean that you get right grades, right? So that
And I
means that
wonder, like, how often do you have like a situation where somebody gets like a whole lot of help in a specific subject that they're having a really difficult time, right? They they get the help, they get the extra tutoring, they kind of skate by with their C or whatever, and then they're fine, right? I mean, at that point, you're kind of fucking sick of it. You're kind of done with it. What's the likelihood that you go specifically into an area or a career where it's like, oh, good thing I got it nailed down, like, right? Good thing I got that C in chemistry, right? Like you're probably gonna end up finding something to do, something to study, somewhere to go in the workforce that doesn't have anything to fucking do with it, right?
yeah,
You
but
know
like
what I mean?
if that
Like
subject is
the ones who are going to be like your future chemists, they didn't need the extra attention and focus really, or like they could have gotten it and could have advanced maybe, but then it's like we held back them in favor of focusing on people who like in all likelihood like they're not going to do it, which I know that's a little bit of a fatalistic attitude to just be like, well, they're shit at it now, so they're probably never going to really use it, so don't invest in it. It's not really what I mean to say, but it's just more of like that structure doesn't really seem to make a lot of practical sense compared to like what you're describing is kind of similar to under an unschooling or homeschooling model with self-motivated learning. You find some kind of hobby and make that central to the learning, because just about anything you could think of, right, that's like a job, like they could be doing things and then you can look at how it's kind of checking all the boxes for a standard education, right? Like math isn't just about everything. Math, dealing with numbers and kind of calculating, counting things and double checking stuff, like your basic arithmetic. And then if it's a topic that you can kind of deeper studying, and there's probably maybe like statistical information and things like that do go deeper into math. But then you have like a reason that you're learning the deeper math. You know what I mean? As opposed to just learning it in the abstract and then thinking of some reason to apply it later. You know, or just noticing in reality, oh yeah, this is kind of like something I vaguely remember from math class. Well, we're learning it again either way, right?
I mean, like, basically what it's become is that, like, if you want to get into a college to study something that you want to study, right? Because you want a credential, because you want a career in it, you want to work in it, right? Then you usually need credentials from your previous education, like your high school, right? You need a certain type of grade in certain type of subject. And therefore,
So in America, basically you can skip to the undergraduate level. High school is skippable.
Robbie, you still need the credentials to get admitted into undergrad.
Yeah, well, and I mean that's the thing though, is you're not in school. You can focus on those credentials, right? You know, so it's
Yeah, but the
you
credentials
have more
you're
time and ability and access to credential yourself as a homeschooler. You had a better advantage
no,
than
I'm
somebody
not.
who's hitting those boxes as part of a much larger thing that they have to navigate that's more static and immovable.
No, but I'm saying that when it comes to, like, homeschooling is equally good. Is also good. Like, I'm not saying that that's not good. What I'm saying is that the public schooling or the school system in general are not very. It doesn't, like, have the structure to find these intelligent and these bright children to get them the resources that they would require to get where they ought to be. Like, you need to have those structures, because you're only focusing on, like, oh, we need to make sure that everybody passes because that's the only thing that matters. And the only way to make sure that this doesn't become a problem is that some countries, you're admitted into a high school based on your credential from middle school. That means you have high grades, you get admitted. The highest graders get admitted into the college, into the high school. So everybody applies to high school. The one with the highest grades, they get admitted, right? Which is great. Not really, but it's like, but that means that the grade becomes even more important, because then, in order to make sure that you can get the student base, that you can now focus on, like, utilizing their potential more better, so that they can get to where they where they ought to be, right, with their performance, or helping them to get there, because, like, you provide a good environment for them. Then you have that incentive there, because you have admissions to high school, right, based on your grades, which means you won't just, like, get somebody because, oh, we need to take care of these kids that are very, very bad, because they are, like, they need, like, more help. We need to help them more, right? Which is good, but, like, the problem with what you have there is that many of these countries, many of these schools that have brightest students have high requirement for passing certain grade marks, which means that if you are intelligent and you go to those schools, then you're going to get good grades, but you probably will get better grade if you went to a worse school, because they have a lower requirement for high grading, which means that the system that you have, you're literally disincentivizing people that
You
are
know,
smart enough.
somehow that doesn't
Wait, I
bother
was
me
just
so
getting to a
much.
point.
That
Wait,
doesn't bother me so much. Yeah, go
no,
ahead.
wait.
But yeah,
Well, I just want to say the point. So that means that the schools that are admission based in high school, they are used to catch the kids that have potential, but they still need more focus, so that people don't focus on the worst performing student, right? But they're not top performing students. They just very gifted, and they can be, right. And these schools, right, are perfect for those kids. But when you have those schools, right, that means that those kids might not even get into it, because they just passed, and because in their middle school they were focusing on the worst performing student who also just passed. And even if they do get in, that means that they goes to a school that, rather than to utilize its potential to fulfill uh, the potential of the kids, right, it becomes like an elite school. And now, like, the requirement even higher, which means those kids are very good, that have potential but aren't really high performing, or that aren't really, like, super high performing, but they could be. They instead go to much worse schools, because then the requirement of performing high is much of getting a high performing grade is much lower, So you're still missing them. It's like you're missing people that you shouldn't be missing because of this system. And that's the reason why you can't have one school grading with a higher requirement for grading another, because then everybody want to go to the school would have a lower requirement, because then that's how you gain the system, right? And that's just then you miss
Well, I
people.
mean, it just sounds kind of like a balancing problem either way, right? It's a problem of like the school's reputation having a balance versus the actual grades on paper and not having a. I mean, that's why you have a standardized test ultimately, and just let
Yeah,
that be the arbiter, right?
like many. The only problem I have with standardized testing is that it's better to give teachers a little bit more leeway in like what to focus on. So you have standardized testing, that means that all teachers are focused on the same things, and those things can be very arbitrarily decided, which means that you are not really going to get the best education in that regard. Like what I do think is more important is that there's very clear standards for grading that all teachers ought to follow, right? And a teacher cannot just cheat, right? That just giving your kids nicer or worse grades just because they are like because they want to for whatever reason. I think that's the main issue. Like you shouldn't like let them like you should have it that they all have to, they should have the leeway of how they want to put it in the classes, right? But
Yeah, well, and in theory, that's something that like a Department of Education would set some sort of standard and then have some sort of a way for people to report back, on how they're doing on it and if things need to change or whatever. Which, in turn means you could just do it through like any sort of teachers guild, teachers union, if you have any kind of a license certification process, to maintain that license, you would agree to adhere to certain standards so that everybody that's kind of in that network of teachers, are sort of doing the same thing, right? And then,
but aren't
you'd encourage them to do ongoing education conferences, breakthroughs in pedagogy, new approaches, kind of keeping their minds fresh.
but
Like
aren't teachers
and I think that a
union
lot of industries do that. But yeah,
don't cannot the teachers
there's
union.
a great solution to the problem you're describing, though, because one solution would be to somehow have a little bit more cross pollination, right? Have like more of students learning together, like regardless of what school they're at. And the best way to achieve that would obviously be to desegregate education from the workforce so that everybody's out in the real world mixing around. I think that'd be a pretty great way to standardize and equalize things, and it wouldn't cost anyone a fucking dime.
Well, it's not
And
just
in
about.
fact, we'd make money. Sorry to sound like a broken record, but
It's not just the whole point of just
it's.
standardizing stuff. It's also like to make sure that you or to equalize it because you want people to reach their potential. Um, and that is that like if you, as you said,
I
if
mean,
you
yeah,
make
but
a
like, when are
school.
we measuring when people are going to reach their potential? Sure, certainly, it should be when they're in the workforce, right? Like, we're measuring your productivity at that point. That's your potential.
Right, but if they
Well, as
don't get a job.
education, do we really care about like some sort of educational achievement and then say, wait, haven't quite achieved that enough, so we're not convinced you won't have enough potential versus just letting them go, you know?
I mean, like the reason why we have education performance is you can get into education, and then when you have your degree, you can get a job.
Right. My point isn't that there shouldn't be no standard. It's just that it's not the most critical or fundamental one, right? Like education is really always secondary, kind of, like there should be a reason for it, even if the reason is just to learn about it.
No, yeah, but obviously should be a reason. Otherwise, it doesn't like. Why would you do it? Um, but
I mean,
basically,
the reason is self-evident. If you're doing it, that's its own reason. Maybe you have more reasons, but you always have at least that one, and that is good enough.
yeah, I do think the free market is obviously a solution, which because like if you can have private schools, and if you can like have give the schools and teachers a leeway of how they have their schools being constructed, then that means that much better schools are going to be able to create it, and they're not like controlled by fucking unions, whatever. Because I know in South Africa, the reason why the education is so bad for so many people, public education, is because of the teachers unions. They want to do no work, so they basically force the government to lower the standards and like lower the work hours, which means that people that are kids, sending their kids to public school, right, they are getting way worse education than those private school, which means it becomes a huge gap in what access to education kids have. And that's a huge problem. I think it's like, is it time to talk about how education is not education, but how the school system is very anti-male?
Yeah, because I mean, most of what we're talking about could be kind of seen as gender neutral. I mean, I think that the most important men's issues, sadly, are very, very big and generic, right? So, like, improving them is always going to also improve things for women as kind of a secondary measure. And in this
Oh
case,
fuck it, they would benefit a
improving
lot
people's
from
access to
education.
education uh, and more opportunities in the workforce, that sort of thing. It's a men's issue because it's men who have the social and cultural expectation to always provide, and they don't have the windfall of traditionalism slash progressive feminism that gives you free cash and money because vagina, right? And then that's in addition to the overt sexism through affirmative action. Like absolutely 0% of that should be going toward women. If anything, people are looking for an excuse to hire women in any status quo you're looking at. So, um, but it's just generically true, right? So I think it's all worth highlighting it here. But yeah, from here, I think probably we can try to get a little more specific. But like for
Yeah,
me, that's kind of just the big picture thing. It's like we're talking about preparing people for what to men is often a major core aspect of their identity, which is how they provide for themselves and how they contribute to society.
yeah, like to me, that I don't really feel that. To me, like, no, you're right about all that, but like as an individual man, I don't really care much about gender roles. But basically, here's basically what I want. I want to have my degree. I want to have a job so I can support myself, and or a partner who can support me, and I want to have kids that I can raise and afford. Right? That's the thing I need. I want money. Right? There's nothing like there's no social expectation that I'm feeling beholden to. To me, it's just like I want these things. Um, so therefore, I don't want to be prevented from getting it, which I am because of my sex. Or it's not really. It's just like more of a lot of barriers that comes around that we have went over in other streams. But like, there's also when it comes to this, is that when it comes to men's access to education, education is not made for men, but getting a grade, getting a is more important for men to if they want to get into higher education. But the women have better grades. Um, and people say, oh, it's just because they work harder. A lot of the time, a lot of women do work hard and do have good grades and definitely deserve to have their grades. But it's not that they don't deserve it. It's just that a lot of boys would do equally well if the school system weren't set up in such a way. So therefore, it's not like to take anything away from anyone. It's just to say that it's not a fair structure.
I guess I wonder, because a lot of thing that comes up often is like, oh, I'm a poor test taker, right? There's a lot of people, like, I think there's a lot going on with that phenomenon. Like, I think there's people who, like, yeah, for whatever reason, they just do really badly on tests relative to what their actual knowledge and abilities are because of like anxiety or whatever, something you can kind of like trace and then maybe address and treat or whatever. But then I think also there's a lot of people who just like the idea of it and kind of self-identify with that and kind of use it as an excuse because they actually don't really know it that well, you know?
oh, there was
I
another
think
thing
they
I
get
want.
mixed into there too and make it a kind of a noisier than it needs to be. But I guess I've never really thought about that in particular as if it splits one way versus on men versus women, or I guess we should say boys versus girls, really. Because I imagine that like puberty is a factor, right? And then we know that for boys, there's like a 1 to 2 year gap where they're going to be disadvantaged relative to girls, like around a specific age. That then they catch up. But then I wonder, does puberty help or hurt as far as test anxiety? I'm not really sure. I don't know. I don't know if you've heard or if you know anything about anything related to that specific angle of it.
I mean, like Yeah, I don't really know. I think what you said makes sense. Like basically, what I am saying is that when it comes to the boys are falling behind in education, right, because of the structure of education system is right now. But it's not. But it's also that boys are, when they are finished with education and go into the workforce, they still have less of a support net. So they actually are more dependent on doing well in education in order to have a higher quality of life in any aspect, relative that's like independence, marriage, or family life, or having kids, or like,
Right. Or like, yeah, think of
everything.
like failure to launch, right? People
Yeah,
don't really
exactly.
think about that or associate that with like a woman in her early to mid 20s who's living with her parents, you know? I guess nowadays that's kind of like the norm, isn't it? So let's say, yeah, you get a woman in her 30s living with her parents. You wouldn't call it failure to launch. Like there's a lot of women who like that's just what their arrangement is. And it it's just been that everyone in the family just accepts they're not ready to work for themselves yet or can't or not or whatever. For a woman, that's so much more normalized. Whereas, with a male, they go, are they retarded or what's going on?
I mean, like, it's also not that. It's also that, like, that if it comes to like a male, is that like because it's harder for a male to get to do good in education because of the structure of education, which makes it hard to get into a job, into a college, right? To get the other degrees. But like, and then what you use those degrees for, those education prospects for, is to get a job and to get a partner and to get kids. Men need job to get these things more than women do, right? They need it. They need more access to that. They need it more than women, generally speaking, right? But it's not. I'm not saying that because we need it more that we should get more access to it. I'm saying that we should have equal access to it, but we have less access to it despite needing it more, um, which is a
Right.
problem.
That's kind of the consensus on my channel and anyone who's on it pretty much is that like the Equal Rights Amendment looks great if it's actually applied as they say it's written to do what it says it's going to do, which is like actual equality. Yes, like it on paper, and we're going to do it. No hate and riot or no bullshit. But yeah, I mean, it is like a cruel irony that it's like the people who would be more dependent on their grades being good in order to have like a high quality of life do have to face a bias against them. And there is just the natural grading bias, right? And then of course that female teachers tend to be biased, right, in favor of girls. And then also if you test the students, that they perceive likewise that it's male teachers that tend to be more fair graders, which is kind of fascinating because students really shouldn't know with that much detail exactly what everyone else's grades are, right? To be able to judge and ascertain that, they can just kind of tell by the way the teacher just generally treats people.
It's even worse because some countries are actually like, rather than to grade people based on performance alone, they would grade people based on performance in relation to their classmates, which means that,
Oh yeah, grading on a curve.
which is like horrendous, which should be illegal. Like that is actually violating basic rights of people, which
Yeah,
is
it's
like,
kind of a.
it's
I've never
abhorrent.
fully understood the logic behind it.
The logic is just because they want to because they basically say that, oh, if some classes, right, they just have people giving out grades like cotton candy, and in some classes they basically give no one good grades, so therefore they have to give certain amount of grades to
Right. So I
certain
mean,
amount
it's
of
it's a
people,
it's I can
which is
see how it's lazy then for
horrible.
the teacher because then they guarantee that they're always giving out the same amounts to cover their own ass.
Yeah, it's only to code their eyes. It's horrible for the kids because that means that rather than to help each other, you just compete with each other. And if it's easier for girls, that means the girls are always going to be the ones benefiting, and the boys are going to be suffering. Because if otherwise, if
Right.
you
It just
just,
makes a bad system like even worse, right? Because then
yeah,
it can cause it to basically average out into integers that actually push people off the
and it
off
also
the
means that in a school where in a middle class neighborhood, right, the most parents like give are more attention to their kids, which means the kids are probably a little bit smarter, or probably better in school, right? That means the kids can get reach very far. But if they're competing with each other, like if everybody in the class are quite intelligent, have parents pay a lot of attention to them and helping them with schools, and they are driven and they are focused and they don't cause trouble, right? But the worst one of those are going to get the lowest grade. And if you have like another inner city ghetto school where everybody's just like fucking around and just being dicks and nobody's like doing anything, then the highest performing is going to get equal as the highest performing kids for the previous school, which means that if you go to a good neighborhood, that means that you're going to go way lower grades than what you earned. And if you go a bad neighborhood, it's going to have way higher grades than if you earned, unless you do busing. But then if you do busing, the people from the poor neighborhoods are always going to do poor grade in the good school, and the people in the good neighborhoods are always going to go good grades in the good school and likely be bullied. And let's just not pretend that there's no racial aspect to this.
Right. Well, and that just goes back to the issue of a lack of like cross pollination across schools, because ultimately, all school is segregation, right? It's segregation from the rest of the world and from society, but then also from each other. I mean, the only other interaction you get with like kids from other schools is like through like sports, right, and like things like that, really. And
Like, I'm not saying that
it's not like a
segregation.
sustained sort of an access that makes it easy for people to really be friends.
But I'm not saying that segregation is bad or good. I'm saying that integration and segregation can both be good or bad depending on how it's done.
Well, and
Integration
that's
is
fair
harsh,
enough,
you know.
right?
But
Yeah, if we're using it broadly. I mean, I'd say in this case it's a bad thing, because ultimately the reason that we're having a problem based in like these schools creating different standards and kind of like isolating and crystallizing in different ways that then cause things to be confusing later because nothing is standardized. You sidestep that whole problem if we didn't make all the separations in the first place, right? If the goal is for people to be able to interact with each other on like the same level, then you know
oh, that's
if
what
they're
schools cannot
learning
do.
already in an environment where that's what they're already doing, it's a lot of it's just solving problems that the structure itself kind of came with. It's just mitigating the bad that's inherent in a bad system.
Well, the best thing is to do is just like give more schools more leeway, right? In most things, right, and make sure that it's school choice. I mean, that's
Yeah,
basically
I
the best
guess
solution.
one white pill we can throw out here though is I think that with the advent of AI and the automation of teaching, ultimately it's going to drive down the cost of education and skyrocket the accessibility. And because we're outsourcing so much human judgment to robots, I think it will, on balance, benefit men a lot more than it will women.
Well, that's always lovely, and it doesn't mean women are not going to get hurt by it. It's going to have it more equal. I usually say if you constantly privilege equality feels like
Yeah,
oppression.
no,
Which
I don't think there's any massive downsides to AI and it getting more popular.
no, like basically, like, but it's the fun way. All of the things that we are proposing that would, or that we are talking about, is bad for boys, is also bad for girls, just to a lesser extent. And all the things that would help boys would actually not harm girls at all. So the only reason why someone would be opposed to many of these solutions, or um, the more reasonable solutions that we have, is that they just want boys to like be like down in the gutter, which is like, I guess many people want that. Like when they are looking at,
Mhm.
they compare like educational standards, right, or like educational prospects, right, how they structure classes, right, and in one way they basically had that one type of structure, the linear structure, was was basically good for girls and good for boys, right? And then what did the modular way? It was basically like the girls were basically performing equally well, but the boys did way worse. And then picked the ones that the boys did way worse than the girls because reasons.
Right, because they're measuring things by the feminist standard, which is society should be measured by how well it treats its women and
Yeah,
girls.
but the girls were doing equally well regardless of what system. They
Yeah,
weren't even affected. Like
yeah.
the
Well, and
girls
I mean, people will blame feminism for it because they'll say that people are seeing it as revenge and therefore justifying it that way. I do think
revenge
that that's
against
true, but I
revenge
think
against they're taking revenge against something that allegedly happened women in the past to boys in the future had nothing to do with that, who also were
right. It's
descendants
it's
of the
retarded logic,
like
even like if
it's
you
actually
accept the worldview, and then the worldview itself is based on premises that are not substantiated.
like
So it's multiple levels of being a retard. But the point I want to make is that fundamentally the misandry is deeper than that. Like the will to want to get the revenge is deeper. And it was actually Brian had someone on their stream, on Honey Badger's stream earlier this week for International Men's Day. It was called Modern Feminism. What was it? Yeah, Modern Feminism versus Mankind, I think. And one of the points he brought up was just about how there's different animal behaviors that react to the sexes in different ways, like based on hormones and things. So yeah, it's important to realize everything is on a deeper animalistic level, and I think it's a good example of that when people are choosing education systems. Like that the only distinguishing factor is that it increases the disparity between male and female performance.
Yeah, like it's not good because like basically in order to explain how retarded this like revenge is, it's that when it comes to like idiotic things like racial revenge, so like, oh, this ethnicity did something bad, so therefore we need to hurt their descendants, which is of course evil and wrong, and it's unacceptable. But when it comes to revenge based on sex, you basically not want to hurt the descendants of the perpetrator, you want to hurt the descendants of the victims and the perpetrators. Because of the shared sex with the perpetrators. So like even unlike the racial revenge where the alleged perpetrators are descendants, they're descendants they want to hurt, but in this case they don't even just want to hurt descendants, they want to hurt the descendants of the victims as well.
Yeah, it is like, a little awkward, right?
It's even worse. It even
directly cuts into your fucking community. And like for me, I think that's why misandry is so much more interesting than racism, because it's so suicidal and it's so much like more intuitively evil. Like one of the arguments I've recently kind of realized is, if you're not advocating for the rights of men and boys because like you're a parent of a daughter, that means that you only care about her and value her rights because she happened to be born female. And that your love and protection from her, it's an accident. It's RNG.
And it's not gonna last another generation, because what if she only have boy kids? Like the next generation might all be all sons, right? Right? She might not have.
Right, like any kid you have could potentially be either. And like in theory, like my point is that for any parent, it would be an obvious no-brainer to support men's rights, because your children either are sons or could have been sons, but for a flip of a coin.
You actually could have sons too.
Like what kind of message does it send to your children, right? That it's like like that they care this little about your future.
Yeah, but also they don't care about the future of their children's children in that case, because then they don't know their sex.
Well, and that's the thing, is that, to them, leaving a legacy and supporting their children was important to them. So then the next logical thing that you would assume is, oh, that'll be important for my children too.
Right, but if they only prioritize one sex because they just happen to have one sex of kids.
I mean, I think if we're realistic, I think a lot of parents feel towards their grandchildren kind of the same feelings, if not even more intensely.
Right, but if they only prioritize female because they only had a daughter, and then the daughter only have sons, then like they're just like advocating against their grandchildren for like decades.
Well, and that's why I wonder if there's a way to kind of cut through that empathy gap by pointing out, like, your daughter could have been a son,
and she could also have
one, and then you would care about men's issues, right? But it's like, just out of respect for the fact that your child could have been male, you should be advocating for men's issues.
Yeah, because like people also think that means like, oh, but that means you don't care about women. Actually, it doesn't, because like, don't women want to have a relationship with men that are healthy and decent? And if you don't care about men's issues, then the relationships with men that women are going to have that are good are going to be less attainable, which means that if you care about women, you should care about men. Otherwise, how much do you really care about women?
No, exactly. And the other thing too is, I mean, the trad perspective is always look at all the things that men are doing. What's bad for men is bad for humanity or
Society.
whatever, right? And I hate that perspective because it reduces men down to human doings rather than human beings. It's language that I see like mankind kind of dips into, right? Which I understand they're trying to be, they're being helpful and they're being effective in their own way. And that
I'll,
language resonates with a lot of men. Like a lot of men really do feel the need to essentially be used, like to be a utility to others.
but like it's basically to me, my perspective is that people, like for me, like my values is that I care about people and I care about myself, and people usually cooperate to get benefits each other. People have very much utility for each other. Humans are very social, so therefore, like I expect it to be useful for others and others to be useful for me. That's how cooperation work. Um, so it's not that's how being social works. So therefore, we're not antisocial. We are pro-social because
Right.
we
Well,
want
and the
cooperation
heart of
to
that
be.
is basically just understanding non-communist economics, which is, economics, right? And not this like fear that like, oh, capitalist activity is soulless because money was involved at some point, right? Or
Which doesn't
whatever.
make any sense. Like money is just a token that you can exchange for resources.
It's a
Like
form of technology. Yeah.
yeah, like
It's a technology that allows for a medium of exchange. That's
human beings when they are like everything is transactional to some extent.
right. No,
Like
exactly. Right. So then when you understand that there's opportunity to be social in capitalism, and that insofar as capitalism is promoted and that it thrives, it's creating more and more of those opportunities. Then you see that things that inhibit and get in the way of that market exchange are, they're fucking up what's social. They're fucking up the social fabric of your world and your society. And they're meddling with shit that they don't have a right to meddle with, which is, my grounds for rejecting any of their utilitarian arguments. It doesn't matter if they think the outcomes are going to be great.
yeah, but even
That's
from a
the reason.
utilitarian perspective, completely getting rid of government and just being social is actually more utilitarian for everybody.
Well, and that's the thing too, is it's clearly Orwell words, right? They're using the opposite because they know that they're not the thing, right?
That
Calling
kind of
things
makes
by their
sense.
opposite to fuck with people's brain and to promote an inverted paradigm.
This is very evil. But I want to move on to the intersection now.
Yeah, I think I got maybe like half an hour-ish here. So I'll leave you the floor and I'll hit the ground
Okay.
running. Yeah,
So like we do which one do you want to start? We're gonna start with the race because it's easier.
sure.
We get to disability later because I think we should take it on this stream and not another one. And that is that like the racial aspects of this is that we have sort of thing called affirmative action based on the sex. And I don't know if any country of all jurisdictions, but in plenty of jurisdictions, there is affirmative action based on sex. And that is because they wanted to I don't know, they wanted to make sure that women had more access to getting into to education because there were more men doing it, and the reason why there were more men doing it was because more men were required to get those degrees to support a family, and when women first went to education, they were just housewives anyway afterwards. Not all, but plenty of them, so they didn't need it as much, right? So that there were more men in education. But then later, when women working and supporting that part of supporting the family became more common, and also it was actually common before, but it became more common with people with that could have access to education before, because in the past working class people didn't have that much access to higher education, but now they do, right? Or a long time in the past they did, right, as well. But because fewer women were there, they basically wanted to push them into it. So they basically used have affirmative action to push women in there. But now education system is made for girls. So girls still have better grades. So there is no need to have lower standards for women to get education where they have more access to than men. because they are
Right.
have
There's a distinction between privileged access to the system and then like privilege in the system once you're in it as well.
right. So it's like, because when it comes to other aspects of affirmative action, at least they do it to people that are generally performing less than the people that are overrepresented. But now they're giving it to people who are performing more. They're overrepresented, and then they use
Well, I
things
bet they have a nice incentive to do that, right? So they get their woke points, they get their SJW points, but then they don't have to actually take a hit for it.
right, because like usually when it comes to like they want to
Because
make
if there's going to be any sort of like a way that system balances out, that would be the trade-off, right? Is you want to make your school look really, really inclusive and diverse, but you know that like the average like GPA and achievement is going to on average take a hit, and that you're going to cause some more pedagogical challenges, but you think it's worth it because of like other aspects it might bring to the table. And it might be depending on the situation, and that's up to every single school individually to decide rather than government bureaucrats.
yeah, and this is like an example I have is that when you're in there, like your sex becomes male sex is actually very much a detriment in many aspects, because they basically want some example I have anecdotal. They want to have more diversity in a different in a specific thing in the school, and it is not like something that matters when it comes to like your grades or your performance. It's basically about student life and stuff, but they wanted it to be diverse, right? Even though there were more women than men, they would still get a white woman than a white man, even though he was a lesser owned more less represented than the female, because there are too many white people, right? So therefore, like, rather than to like change it to a black person, right? They just changed it to a white woman instead, because women were still considered to be like more diverse. And I think that guy really worked hard on that. So it was like really fucking horrible, which is like I'm happy that it wasn't like about and like given like grade and stuff like that, but it still was like a form of discrimination that is not acceptable, and it was in the education system. Because, and that's an anecdote, but I can't say that this is the only thing that times that happens. It's probably happened more, because like because I can't say it doesn't happen to Asian men either, right? Because the sexes are overrepresented, the races are overrepresented, right, in education, right? The men are still fewer than the women, right? But when they want to make it diverse, they still stack the men in favor of the women, even though the women are like less diverse because there are more of them, which is bullshit. Do you see what I'm going with this?
No, yeah, it's really funny. Like people will go for like a white woman for a diversity hire, and it's like you did absolutely nothing to make things more diverse that way. If that's what you're trying to do, like it's like the
They actually made
worst
it less
choice you could
diverse.
possibly make, right? uh, well, and especially like in office settings are female dominated, right? I prefer the terms populated than dominated, but if people are going to use the term male dominated, then I'll use it right back and say offices tend to be male dominated. Um, and then there's certain aspects to of like female populated work, like nursing, right? Where they say, "Oh my gosh, they have like the biggest burnout ever, and they injure themselves so much." And it's like, yeah, and that was not true when nursing was a male profession. And it's like it's exactly kind of what you would stupidly predict, right? Like people with 40% less upper body strength doing that kind of work repeatedly, you know,
I mean,
their
that is
bodies break. It's like, yeah, your body would break down like maybe 5 years, a decade early, something like that, right? Like, but you do make a good point also about like you do all this affirmative action to support higher education for women specifically, who then have a pretty good percent chance of just deciding to be housewives later anyway. Because for them it was
that was
more
only
about
positive. I guess
achievement. It
it's
was
still a
more
positive.
about like a matter of pride, right? Because if they choose to be a housewife early, than somebody who went and got a bunch of degrees and stuff, and like she's a doctor. Well, you don't get to be the doctor woman, you're the housewife woman. So what you want to do is get your PhD in something really easy so you can be doctor woman and then fuck off and get married, because then you get to maintain your status in both fields.
Right, but I want to get
Like
back to
if
the
you can manage all that.
but I need to get more important into aspect of affirmative action is like bad in a way, because I want to like underline it. It's not just affirmative action based on your sex. that means that the men are losing out because of that thing alone, despite having more higher requirement. It's harder for men to get into higher education, but they also have affirmative action placed like on top of that to make it even worse. But then there is affirmative action based on race, right? And I can give some examples of this. Like it's different from different countries. Like the example I know best is South Africa and like America. And I think that like when it comes to affirmative action, is that it's basically just like black get the most, and then Hispanic. White is kind of like the middle ground, and then the Asians are like the hardest one for them to get, right? So therefore, like if you are a male that applies for higher education in America, that is going to be harder if you're white than if you are like of color. But then like being Asian is like make it even harder. And if you're white, that's like you have the white magnifier, and then you have the Asian. It becomes even harder, right? If you're male as well, because the male is also the sex. You're discriminating on that level, on that basis too, right? But then you have another aspect about this, and that is that when it comes to Southeast Asian men, and that is that one thing that the affirmative action is like not is not as bad as when it comes to sex. Is that when it comes to sex, it is like you're giving preferential treatment to people that are performing well, not that those are performing less, right? And the main is justified because women are underrepresented in certain fields that they are less inclined to go into because they have less interest in there. And if you go to STEM field, it's going to be workshop for just women in STEM field, but even if the man might need it as well, because there's so many men in it, so therefore they make so much space for specifically women, but so not for most students, and they would actually need that too, which is like a form of discrimination in there. But going back to the affirmative action based on race, is that it's actually somewhat logical, even though it's bad, because when it comes to black people and Hispanic people, especially black people, is that they aren't like have the same performance level as white people usually, and white have less than Asian. So therefore, that they have those basically make it so that the races are more demographically represented in higher education as they are in the country. Even though it is a terrible policy, it's not as terrible as affirmative action based on sex. But the problem with this is that we have Southeast Asians who are actually not performing that much higher than white people on average in the United States. But they are counted as and they're graded held to the high standard of East Asian and not to the standard of white people, despite are somewhere in between, which means that the higher that their affirmative action that the others are getting, that they are disfavored, is actually based on how it's based on a fault that is based on the fact that East Asians are doing way better than them, because there's more East Asians in the country. And that is what causes there to be like a myth there that causes that even if someone think affirmative action should happen based on race to even out the skills of different races, it actually like just makes that the Southeast Asian men have a higher bar than how the performance level usually are. And that's the reason why they are like.
Right. So then that's funny because yeah. So you can have it artificially raise a bar for someone, and like the tricky thing about that is like not only is it a form of like double discrimination against just Asian men in general, assuming that they are in that targeted group,
And
but
triple
it's like a
is
triple issue, right? But and then it's also of course going to apply to any like East Asian men that just happen to not get super high grades, as you know, they might just be like half of them are going to be below average, right? So then the half of the Asians who are below average, they're already getting disadvantages by a system that, you know, holds them racially to a higher standard. Like by definition, that's going to disadvantage, right? You know what I mean? The ones that would be pulling it down more closer to like the white average. And then ultimately, like, you know, the solution to this problem would be like, oh, well, if they just created, you know, they just got to be more specific, right? Because that way they can give Southeast Asians their own modifier. But then, of course, within that, you find another subset where it doesn't quite work. And then you would just end up doing it infinitely until it's down to the individual level and you stop doing it.
yeah, like I just think you should stop doing it because like the racial categories, even between different ethnicities in the same category, right? Then there's still a disparity. So if you're going to do it at all, I don't think you should, but if you are, you should do it based on the individual ethnicity. Because like I think that like Franco-Americans and Russo-Americans have a different performance level in higher education, right? And they're both white people, right? So therefore, like, it doesn't really make sense. And also like it's also like so many ethnicities are from the same country and they still perform very differently. So it's like just having affirmative action based on ethnicity is stupid, but it's not as stupid having it based on racial category. That's even worse, and that's what you have now. So you get rid of it. But like then you have the problem is that many, like especially black people, their quality of education that they have is tend to often be not as good as that for other races in America, which is very bad. But it's also because of like the voting patterns that are existing there. But the kids didn't choose that because they're kids, they can't vote, and also because if the schools are shit, right, or less worse, like just like giving a no child left behind policy so that like they get like passing regardless on affirmative action, that's just gonna cause them to drop out when they get into higher education anyways. It's not even helping.
Right. That's another issue too, is it just sets them up to get a really demoralizing feeling. Well, and that's the issue too, is that ultimately what we're talking about are like different points at which the system is going to inflate people's accomplishments or inflate, or distort, their value, right? And ultimately, that has to come up and catch up with you. It's like lying about too much shit on a resume, right? Like overinflating it, and then over promising, right? So
Yeah, and it's also like it is another intersection is that when it comes to some, like especially Black and Hispanic men that are in neighborhoods or like are in communities where they don't have the same access to education, and that can intersect with their sex because boys have a harder time in the education system in general. So therefore, that's another intersection based on race and education. But also like as you said before, like any ethnicity that is high performing, those that aren't in that category, but that are in the category but not high performing, they're gonna get sacked because their ethnicity is high to a high standard than others. So therefore, like if you have ethnicity-based or race-based affirmative action, that means that like that you're going to force them to perform differently. Because if an Asian man needs to apply higher than a Black woman to the same access of education, that means that it's just going to incentivize the Black woman to use like stop trying hard and the Asian guy to try much harder, which means that the performance gap is just going to keep rising or stagnate. You're not going to change the performance gap. You're actually going to
right, like there's
like
structural things that kind of come with that then being the set standard and that being people's attitude toward it as well. Like it can become like a self-fulfilling prophecy in its own way. Like it's going to have its own entropy. So
yeah. I will say there's actually different type of affirmative action in South Africa, right? Because in South Africa, you basically also have affirmative action based on sex and based on like race. But then it's like you have the Black people get the most affirmative action, right? And then you have the colored, and then you have the Indians, and then you have white people, right, at the lowest instead of Asians being at the lowest. But technically, in South Africa, Asians such as Koreans, Taiwanese, and Japanese, they are basically just treated as white under this system, and the Chinese people are either treated as colored, or some Chinese people that came with the current government because the CCP is aligned with the ANC. They basically like are treated like Black people, but that's mainly good employment, right? So you basically have East Asian being split within various categories rather than being in their own category. Which is like, you explain how fucking stupid having affirmative action based on race really is, because you aren't even categorizing the race as they are. And
I'd be interested in like an HR expert really getting into the like how dirty it gets,
that
especially
would
like
be me.
large
That would be.
companies.
I'm the expert. I'm the expert on
Yeah,
this, bro.
big. Yeah.
But I will have to underline here is that like it is bad that like many Black South Africans have worse access to education, and that is because of the teachers union, right? And that is because of like the teachers union is like they don't want to do any work, which means that the schools that Black people can't afford to send their kids to is the only good schools, which means that the Black kids get worse education, and the boys, because we know education is for boys, they're gonna suffer more from this. And also, like when it comes to the white boys and also the brown boys, they are also suffering because they have discriminated based on based on race and because of their sex. Because you have affirmative action in South Africa based on sex too for women because they were, I guess, segregated in their parties as well. I don't know. No, it's actually because women didn't have the same inheritance laws during the apartheid, which is like, I guess, the justification for affirmative action on sex too. But it's also very bad. So that's another intersection where but then it's the men of minorities that are being discriminated against, which is actually worse because at least in America, the majority of white people that aren't for the affirmative action, they are still like the majority, so they are still the average. It's just that the Black and Hispanic is a little bit of a privilege. But in South Africa, you're talking about the minority people getting it shit. In America, I guess the men aren't the majority, so they get very shafted by affirmative action compared to female counterpart. Even the men who are white in the majority. But in South Africa, all the minority men get very shafted, so that's really terrible. And I will now transition into talking about how this affects disability because.
Well, before we get into that, actually, I think maybe we want to save the disability arc for another one here, because I think we should kind of try to tidy up on kind of the racial part of the.
Yeah, I mean, if there are more things to say about the racial part, because I know that in these countries you actually can get affirmative action if you have a disability. So therefore, like, they can also like take the edge also of your race and your sex to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, you could compare it to like a painkiller in that way. It'd be kind of nice if they didn't, um, begin with a system that's going to inherently kind of disadvantage them. But like, that's kind of the main issue, and I guess it kind of applies to both the race and the disability side of it, which is that these systems are here ostensibly to help equalize and to help make all these issues better. But if you look at the details of any of them, you can see how, at the point of like when they choose admissions, and then at the point of when they determine grades, and then at the point of how they determine what schools are even like you're allowed to use through the public system. And then when you look at the entropy of how certain schools are going to then foster certain cultures just based on the pool of students available, and then the various bad incentives for how everything is promoted. Like they've really created a lot of unique opportunities to create a lot of things that have, I guess, apparently unintentionally been disadvantageous, right?
Yeah.
That, like people say as like a cliche, it, creates more problems than it solves. And with something like education, it's just undisputable to me. For every solution you can find, at least a dozen and some change different problems. And it really just gets back to that people are doing this weird heuristic way of thinking where they outsource the goal to the pursuing of the stated goal, right? We have a department that is child protective services. So rather than caring about whether or not children are actually protected, as long as we're supporting CPS, we're doing what's right, right? And as long as we're supporting the Department of Education, that's pro-education. If you cut the Department of Education, you're anti-education, right? If you want more of a thing, you fund the thing. It's this very simplistic mindset. And ultimately, when you take a step back, what it reflects is not really caring about whatever the Ministry of Truth, says it is. So,
Yeah,
if you
like
support education, that which is called education in its current school-based government structure, I can only assume that you're not someone who really values education or understands what it is or what the point of it is, or really cares when it's hurt or harmed.
No, that you're actually right about that. But like what I'm saying is also that that people like this you said about, but like if it's like you're against the Department of Education, against education, no, it's just because the Department of Education is shit. So we don't want it. That's the reason why.
Want it. I don't want any.
Yeah. Do you want us to save the disability discussion for later, depending how long we have now?
Yeah, I was thinking of wrapping it up about here. I
Yeah,
think we've
so
been
I think
going
the
for
next time,
close to an hour or so. Oh, an hour
yeah,
and a half here, which is a pretty good amount of time. Trying to get into more of the habit of just jumping onto a stream, just so I can kind of do more of them. And I do need to figure out my headset situation so I can use a proper mic. Although I'm pretty happy with, for my computer for what it is, it's doing okay. Um, I have to dabble in YouTube's editor a little bit, see what I can't clean up. But yeah, so I don't know, a bit of a ramble here, but I think we touched on a lot of good topics.
yeah.
Any closing thoughts? Anything lingering we want to make sure we get out there?
It's more of a tease. It's basically like, even though there is affirmative action for disability, that is way more excusable than all the other affirmative action. But even with it, being disabled is almost always going to be more of a negative when it comes to access to education than a positive.
Right. I mean, in most advancements in education, kind of the big reason you celebrate them is that it's offsetting something that's already disadvantageous, you know? Like the
Yeah,
backdrop is that we're kind of trying to, offset natural disadvantages.
that's true. That's what we need to do. And there's so much to say about it, so it's much better to take an extreme for it, because it's hard to summarize, but that is very important to go over.
We'll keep brewing and yeah, and if anybody, and I appreciate us, Johnny Nobody, hopping into the chat here because yeah, pretty much all your comments here are like on point. I don't think Streamlabs lets me show the comments right on the stream here, so I might have to find a way to cheat around that because I don't want to give them any money. But it's just a comment here that a lot of this is just covering how horrible single mothers are raising children. You know, it's it's a
Oh, I have
truth
to say one thing
on a
about that.
basic fucking level. If you think that parents are important, then you have to think that two parents is twice as good as one, right? And the issue a lot of with single mothers is that they've been very lionized in society and destigmatized to the point where there doesn't really seem to be much effort taken at all to avoid that situation, despite how bad it is for children just on average. So, you know, it's not to say that, obviously if you are a single mother, you got to do your best. But like a
That would
person
be to
who's
get
also a
married.
single mother should understand when people make generic statements like this, right? Like that there should be an understanding and kind of a coping with the huge amount of things that your child has lost for not having a father, right?
Oh,
And it's
it's
about compassion for your own child.
I do
So
have
I support these generic statements, even if it's a little inelegant, even if it's a little bit, going to hurt some feelings.
I do have another thing to say about single mothers and access to education. Is that being a single mother, if you have a single mother, it's gonna impact access to education harder, which means that boys raised by single mothers gonna have less access to higher education and have worse grades in general. And some ethnic groups and races are more likely to be raised by single mothers. So if you're a black guy, you're more likely to be raised by a single mother, and that is because of the system. Um, and that means that your access to education will be less than that. And to like use affirmative action to fix that is just like putting a bandage on a stab wound. It's not going to help
Right,
going
because I
forward
mean,
at
this
all. It's
is
just going to make
true.
it worse.
It's true with any form of restitution where it's never real, and the person receiving restitution, it always comes with the implication that the preferable status quo is for none of this to happen, right? There's always that gap in there, So like restitution, the idea or a path toward redemption, a path toward trying to offset problems should never be the justification for the problem existing, right?
Yeah,
It
and
should never take
usually,
precedence over preventing it. Prevention is the cure.
like
Um,
usually, all these problems, all these solutions that people have proposed with affirmative action, um, they're just like either are creating a problem that doesn't exist, or they are failing at fixing a problem that exists, and they're just like making the problems, they're just making the problem worse. or they're creating a new problem, or they're just equalizing the problem so that instead of one demographic being disadvantaged, now all of them are. So we're all oppressed together, which is like, can we just like remove the oppression completely then?
Well, and that part of the issue too is it's sort of this fallacy of averages where people think, oh, like black people have been disadvantaged. So if I advantage more black people, now we have a longer time scale. We've got a -20 here, we got a +20 here, and it all averages out.
Isn't that just a zero-sum
And
game
like
concept?
the reason it's stupid is because it's like, okay, but within your broad category of black people, you have black people in the past and then black people in the future. You have these two categories of totally separate people. And when you now look at it with that level of nuance, you see what you've done is just a ridiculous, pointless, and none of your affirmative action actually addressed any of the things that you said it did, right? Because it's all in the fucking past. So you have that issue, and it's true with literally everything. Boomers do it a lot when they talk about quote unquote the young. Really, a lot of what they're describing are things that are more apparent, I think, in females than in males. But then their reactions to things cause more problems for like the male half of it, but they're only seeing it as, the young all averaged out,
Oh,
aren't
I
doing
need to say something
right.
about that. It's also that when it comes to boomer men, a lot of them they basically say like, why aren't Zoomer men having a marriage and a job and a house owning at the time I had all those things? And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, of course they don't. How were we able to have that? Like,
Yeah, all of their takes get blown out of the water through like a simple inflation calculator, right?
not just that, but like just look at the house market, look at the immigration, look at all the affirmative action that are against boys in education. How the hell could boys now do as well as the boomers did? It's impossible. Like you can do that, but it's way harder. So therefore, less are doing it because we can't. We're held to like 5 times the high standards than they were.
Well, and that's the thing, is the thing that's so despicable about boomers is they were benefactors of all of these systems that they didn't appreciate at all, and just really ignorantly sabotaged
And
through
how
all of
active do
these
we have that?
government overreaches and programs that they let through the cracks, sometimes, sometimes deliberately supporting them, you know and it's like the moral of something sounding too good to be true, of making deals with the devil, of taking a short term game over the long term, not being wise, like, and that entire constellation of morals and ideas, just none of that happened. None of that was really reflected in their choices and priorities in general as a generation. And certainly, any of those among them who knew better should have been screaming bloody murder the entire time. So you can give a pass to like half a dozen really, really causey libertarians, but that's about where that ends. So, and it's the fact they benefit from something and they don't understand it, and they can't name it, they don't care about it, and that would be the market, and having access to a system that grew from a market organically, where you have that expertise and you have those traditions that have been kept alive, which a lot of these government interventions, especially in like healthcare, for example, it kills the supply chains and the natural balance of all of these systems that were created through market forces predominantly.
Yeah, that's actually true. It's actually such a shame that like that they didn't really have to suffer the brunt of affirmative action policies younger men do, but acting as though we don't.
Yeah, and they impose it as a way to make them to absolve themselves of their racism, because for a lot of them, these seem like really big asks. They're like, oh man, like imagine working with a black man, right? But like to people younger than them, it's like, this is like, the fuck are you on about, right? Like we don't have these hang-ups that older generations have so much. But because they feel guilty about that in light of the way things have changed over time, it's like, by being these boomer CEOs who enforce these retarded policies that are harming their business and harming all the people that they think that they're helping, they're it's just a way of psychically scratching an itch
There's
for
something
reasons to impose on others. You know, it's
something
insulting and it's counterproductive.
There's something I would actually say that many of the affirmative policies are actually very bad for Black men, especially in South Africa, because that just means that like they're going to like have to cut places and have to cut spending, which means that the amount of total learners they can have in a place is going to be reduced. I don't think that happens so much in education; it happens more in the workforce, which is a problem. Because I think in education, even if you don't uphold the affirmative action standard, you still don't have to reduce your cost. It's actually more of a hard time for the private sector. So it does affect them negatively in the workforce, but it doesn't really affect them negatively in education. Except that they might get into education that they won't be able to complete because they got shit education back in high school because of the teachers union, and only were allowed in based on affirmative action, which means they're gonna fail. Which is like you setting them up for failure, and then they're still gonna be in debt because they have to pay for that. I think the same is in
Right,
America.
and that's the thing too, is you're really heavily penalized for learning that you know that approach to education that was, you know, I guess I don't want to say forced on people, but I mean it really is all but forced, you know, like about as close as you can come. You know, you raise someone sent to school, you know, 5 days a week, the entire day for their entire life. It's like the most central aspect of everything that's structured and like the top priority in their life, and it defines everything day to day. Like, unless you deliberately expose them to things in the outside world, which in the modern world, it's like what, like running lots of errands, right? It's kind of, you know, without enough like thoughtful, dedicated time to that and the free time necessary to really cultivate that. Most people don't have an imagination outside of just continuing to do school. And anything that you choose that is not that is choosing to give up and to choose something that's less ambitious, right? Because obviously school is the most important thing. It's the first thing they started doing to us, right? Like, so to me, that was kind of the perspective, is that it's like you don't want to shame people for how far in education they go, but I mean, obviously, the farther in education you go, the more dedicated you are, the better
Depends
the
on if
smarter
you
you
don't.
are, whatever. The more put together you are.
It does
People, I
depend.
think it's easy to cling to that as an identity, right? To say, "Look at me, I'm on track with education. I'm the smarty pants. I got a degree."
But
Um,
if that degree isn't like fucking gender studies and you got affirmative action, how fucking smart are you? And people can see that because now people actually think that people that are like of color, who have degrees, people think that, oh, especially if they're female, oh, you only got there because of affirmative action, because likely she did.
the thing is, though, is people don't just assume that, and
Some do.
and I think a lot of times people, you know, you can just, if your degree isn't something stupid, just tuck that part away and just say you got a liberal arts degree, right? Um, and you know, it's still very real for people that even if you reduce it to a piece of paper, it's like, yeah, but that on that binary, yes or no, you know, just being able to say, yep, I got the undergraduate degree, yep, I can check that box, you know. uh, it carries a lot of powerful psychological weight. But then the other thing too is, from a student's perspective, choosing what major they are, it doesn't matter if whatever they're choosing ends up being retarded or useless or whatever. My point is that a lot of the driving force of education is kind of just a source of validation and identity, a perceived source of validation and identity that kind of tunnels people, you know. And then the other thing too is it exposes people to education in ways that aren't necessarily logical, and kind of puts a bad taste in people's mouth, and it makes people tell themselves that they're bad at certain subjects or not interested in certain things, when, you know, in reality you probably just approached it in the wrong order, right? Or it didn't hit you after you had some kind of context for applying it that now makes it very interesting. And I think people give up on that too much, and then I identify with those shortcomings too quickly. And that the current system kind of facilitates that in a way that a more open system, where people are just expected to learn through exposure to the market. Um,
Well, I would also like to point out that, like, just because, like, I don't think it's fair to assume that somebody who is like diverse got there just because of affirmative action. But the
It's
thing
kind of
with
a rare perspective, right? Like conservatives might kind of assume or think that or whatever, and like yeah, there's an idea that it kind of tarnishes or cheapens the accomplishment, but I don't think that perspective is as
no,
prevalent.
no, but I'm saying it's time it's kind of, but like it would be kind of weird to like get in as a black person in education and like not knowing if it was just because of affirmative action. Like when it comes
I
to like
mean, there
promotions.
is to some degree we might be overemphasizing the importance of affirmative action. In theory, these should be like highly sophisticated tiebreakers, right? How often is it close enough to a tie that it's really
It
just
never is, because if you look at like the gap that like there was like one Puerto Rican chick who was like looked white enough for Jim Crow and apartheid, by the way, who got into to a college without being able to read English, and then an Asian guy that had almost straight A's didn't get in because he was an Asian guy.
like
That's how.
aside from it being really bad would be like yeah like so you have your example of a perfect candidate who gets rejected, or like you even have like a backlog of those, right, where like you have like a bunch of 4.0s just like on standby and there's stockpiling
And it also
just
like
crazy.
what it also
Yeah,
does is it basically precludes these like women-only programs that men could use in like Stanfield and stuff like that, and also like the affirmative action that really puts down white men, but also East Asian men. Those type of mostly men, but also kind of some women. Um, they basically like you're like losing talent that the country could have utilized, right? And then the same country basically said, "Oh, we just need to have these talents through immigration." But if you didn't have affirmative action, then you would have more people that were highly
yeah, in
qualified.
your own pool of your own people,
It's just
right?
like so stupid. It just like makes everything worse. It's just like a lot of the things
Well,
that
and
they're
like the whole
really aren't
immigration
sensible.
angle, right? The whole like we're gonna import immigrants because of the. I mean, it's a scam and a cover for importing people with demographics that they think are just gonna vote for them.
No, it always is. We know that. That this is a fact.
Uh,
Like you even have it on TV. You basically have state-funded TV in European countries. Literally said this word for word. Well, this town was originally only 5% Hispanic, but now it's 20% Hispanic. So what the Democrats were planning was just to waiting until they get more Hispanic than it was before, because they tend to vote for them. But I didn't realize that now more Hispanics in this era are actually voting Republican. Like you see, they literally you say we just wait for more
right.
immigration
I
to
mean,
take place, and then we win. But then they didn't win because many Hispanics that immigrated were insulted about being called Latinx because that's a slur.
that really just comes down to like a little bit of a political miscalculation. I mean,
Yeah,
it ultimately doesn't really matter, right?
no, but it just
Like because the
exposes.
Republican Party has to maintain its position as controlled opposition, and it's operating on like median voter theory basically. So it's only going to go as far right wing as it absolutely has to continue to survive. And there's maybe a few key ways that Trump pushes that envelope a little bit in unusual ways, but for the most part, people really shouldn't be too excited over anything the Republicans are doing or gaining.
Oh, absolutely. My point wasn't
Except
like like
insofar as it's funny if it makes Democrats sad, like a little
no,
bit.
that was the main point. Is just like it makes it that that their plans didn't work. But my point I'm saying is that the fact that they are just using immigration to get votes is an open secret, because news media that are state owned in European countries say that it is. That's how open this is of an open
Yeah, it's one of
secret.
those things where they'll admit to it if it's in a context that sounds like it's painting it in a really positive light,
They
right?
didn't paint it. They were very neutral.
They'll
But
they'll they'll,
they
they'll have
posted
like an
very
article that'll be
targeted.
like immigrants have spoken, like they believe that our vision is the way for a new Germany or whatever, right? And then the moment you point out like you selectively chose these because you can predict the demographics of them and that's what motivates you and that's why you're choosing these countries and not these ones, right? Then of course they deny it up and down. The same thing with like what is it? It has to do with like the birth rate and women going into the workforce, right? they'll say like, now that women have so many choices, look at that, they're choosing this, they're choosing that, then they'll celebrate it. And then if they think that like declining birth rates are a good thing, they'll say, hey, like they'll take credit for it even. Like, look, we're fighting global hunger, we're reducing carbon footprints. Look how great this is for the planet. And then once there's crises in countries because they have a declining birth rate and it's actually fucking up their shit, oh, how dare you blame women joining the workforce for this? Like you're a misogynist.
But I would like to
For
use
pointing
from the
out the negative consequences of the same thing that they took credit for.
But I think that like the point is being missed that I was making. I'm not saying that the news weren't saying that the strategy of opposing voters, they didn't portray it in a positive or a negative light. In any way, it seems they put it in more of a negative light. But they were just saying quite bluntly that it was happening, that this is what the Democrats in America are doing. They didn't say this is good. They didn't say they said this was what they're doing and it failed. That's what they're saying. They weren't portraying it as being a positive thing.
Well, yeah, in the context of the story of the Mexican
Yeah.
immigrant, sure. Right.
Yeah, they weren't saying, because it was like a European news agency who covered it. So yeah, I just wanted to make that clear. So next time we need to go how being disabled fucks up your educational prospects, which is going to be very interesting, because it does for sure. Like,
definitely a lot of aspects there. I mean, for me with educational, so much of it is just non-unique to the general structure of it, but
the point is that of this is we need to have an intersection to know like which type of men are affected by this negative thing in society to different extent.
I mean, I think there's a huge number of red flags surrounding just autism, right? And like what gets considered it, and then how people get treated through those systems, and overdiagnosing, misdiagnosing, to the point where I think it's just even the conventional categorizing of it doesn't really seem good. Like I think that they should really be looking to potentially overhaul a lot of how mental health is looked at and portrayed and treated. We had a stream about a year ago actually, where we went into a lot of this stuff. I think with Ashley.
Yeah.
Or no, I don't. I think that he had sent me a pretty nice write up. I think rather than hopping on, but anyway. So
But
yeah, that's a little bit of a sneak peek on what we'll be segueing into for the next one. The next one will be when we feel like it.
yeah, we'll let you know.
I'm gonna go ahead
It
and
could be
end
live.
it here. Yeah, thanks again to Chatter for showing up here. Some of these I'm going to be remembering because they do spur some ideas for some topics that are not necessarily related. Although this was enough of a ramble here, it's always a little bit gray as far as where the lines are going to draw on topics. But definitely some food for thought in the comments here. Especially this comment, if courts gave voice to their fathers, this would solve the home owning issues. I've never thought about this one in depth. The idea of like how home ownership kind of goes through families, and the idea that if it was male ownership in the house and then he's raising sons, that you'd probably have like less maybe renter situations, things like that. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm just, my mind's kind of pontificating in a few different directions with this one in particular. But anyway, before we go too deep down that one, thank you, Jay Willie, for sitting with me and leading the discussion here. And I hope everybody has a nice weekend. Keep it easy.